again. Now I'd like to continue my discussion of gender roles in contemporary poetry by looking at Jamaica Kincaid's Girl and then Seamus Heaney's poem Punishment. Now, to start off, Jamaica Kincaid's text can be considered a story because it's in prose. However, because it's so brief, I'm including it with a discussion of poetry. And so, to begin, the structure of Jamaica Kincaid's text, whether you want to consider it a story or a poem, is that of a long monologue spoken by someone, probably female, in a position of authority over a young woman. So let me bring up this text. This is the text that I uploaded to our site. So one thing we see here is a long list of things that a young woman has to know how to do. And this ranges from domestic chores to proper ladylike behavior. And the repetition of the phrase, "The slut I know you are so bent on becoming," like right here, and several other places, like right here. This implies that the young woman being addressed is deviant or bad in some way and is in need of correction. This focus on a young woman's behavior shows us how femininity is also determined by behavior. You are a lady because you act like a lady. And ladies must behave according to certain expectations. So she should be the kind of woman that the baker would let near the bread. Now, while the voice that is speaking through most of this text is a female voice, we know this is a woman because she says, "This is how to make a good medicine for a cold. This is how to make a good medicine to throw away a child before it even becomes a child." That's something that only women would really know. Unless, and we're not talking about an actual medical procedure here, we're talking about making an herbal medicine to abort a pregnancy. So even though this speaker is female, she knows how to do all of these feminine chores. I would say that she is not, however, a feminist. She's advocating still for this young woman to undertake a subservient role in relation to men. The young woman must fulfill all of the domestic duties and must still appear virtuous. Not like a slut she is so bent on becoming. And so when all of these behaviors imposed on young women, when they're listed in this way, they appear to be very difficult. This is a lot of stuff to do. And this reminds us, conversely, of the freedoms that men may enjoy that women do not. And I would argue that the voice in this text has actually internalized a lot of these norms. The woman speaking here behaves so as not to appear like a slut. And I think this notion of slut is also a double standard that privileges men over women, because men would have more liberty with their sexuality than a young proper lady would. And so considering all of these restrictions on a woman's life, let us return, or I should say move over to Seamus Heaney's poem Punishment. So this poem is inspired by a bog body. Now that refers to ancient burials in peat bogs. Now this soil that's called peat creates an anaerobic atmosphere so that the body is basically mummified. And that's a picture of the bog body that inspired this poem. And so while these peat bogs, these peat bogs preserve these ancient burials, we can learn a lot from about their practices, their burial practices, and also about their society. So these bogs show us how ancient people buried their dead. And so this particular one is a woman who is believed to have been executed for adultery. Heaney refers to her a little bit later as my poor scapegoat. He remembers her before she was executed as someone who would have been beautiful. But when she was executed, her head was shaved and her blindfold was a dirty bandage. But he says, before they punished you, little adulteress. Right here, my poor scapegoat. I almost love you, but would have cast, I know, the stones of silence. To cast a stone means to participate in a stoning, and stoning is another form of execution where, a crowd of people would throw stones at somebody until they died. And so Heaney is bringing up that form of execution. And so he's saying he would have participated in the stones of silence, meaning through his silence he would have continued to hurt her. By not saying anything, that silence also implies consent. And so he would not have spoken up for her. Instead, he was the artful voyeur. And the voyeur is someone who obtains pleasure by watching. So that's all he is. He's a watcher. He is observing her. He then evokes her fellow women who would have also participated in this execution. So while we might think that they would stick up for her and say, no, she doesn't deserve to be executed for cheating on her husband, they would have also participated and consented. He says, I, who have stood dumb when your betraying sisters, called in tar, wept by the railings, who would connive in civilized outrage, yet understand the exact and tribal, intimate revenge. While the women would have been outraged at this execution, they would have also understood why this revenge had to take place. And so I think the position of these betraying sisters is similar to that of the voice in Jamaica Kincaid's Girl, because these are both women who have internalized the ideas of a patriarchal structure where women are a subservient second class. So while these women would not have liked to see this woman executed in Seamus Heaney's poem that I have up here, they would have understood the exact and tribal intimate revenge. So, we can also see some similarities between the overworked girl in Jamaica Kincaid's text and this executed adulteress. Both are being held to unrealistic patriarchal standards. So remember, while the patriarchy refers to the social system where males hold authority in the family, and that wealth and heritage is passed down through the male line, patriarchy can also refer to the norms and standards that help to uphold this male authority. And some of those standards are also standards that put women in a subservient position, either as a domestic worker, or here as someone whose, sexuality has to be policed. The restrictions on a young woman's sexual behavior is one of these standards that prevents women from enjoying the same kinds of freedom that a man would. So I look forward to reading how you understand these restrictions placed on the lives of women, and how you think that might reflect a patriarchal system. And this is the second part of the discussion board question, I ask also, consider the demands placed on a female child that we see in the work of Sylvia Plath and Jamaica Kincaid. You can also include Seamus Heaney's poem in there. What similarities are there in the way the two female authors represent the role of women in society? Sylvia Plath and Jamaica Kincaid are two female authors. Think also about how Seamus Heaney tries to be sympathetic for this executed woman. So I want everyone to write at least 150 words in response to these questions. Make your discussion board post organized. Remember, it's being graded for organization and use of textual evidence, and also grammar. I also expect you to respond to a classmate's post. And so read what your classmates write, and you want to respond to one other person in at least 50 words. Do you agree or disagree? And can you find some textual evidence to support your ideas or to refute their point? Explain that. I look forward to reading what you have to say, and I will see you on the discussion board.